Hello, and welcome to the Bartlett Summer Show Online 2020. I'm Sam. I graduated from the BSc program last year. I was in Unit 1. And I'd like to take you on a tour of accessible architecture through the show. Hopefully, it's something a little bit different maybe to what the stereotype of the sort of Bartlett work ethos is. I think it's been quite a big year, quite a big few years maybe, in terms of sort of changes and realizations of what's been going wrong in society. It feels like quite a catalyzing moment in our history, both for awful things and hopefully good things coming out of these awful things that have been happening. And it's been a change for the BSc program as well. There's lots of new units, some of which I'm really excited to sort of talk about and take you through. But it feels like we're sort of becoming a little bit more socially aware, and the Bartlett maybe has had a reputation for being a little bit aloof in the past. And I want to celebrate some of the work that's accessible in a couple of different ways. So sort of meaning real world work that is based on a real world problem as opposed to some sort of fictional problem, like instead of building the Silvertown Tunnel, let's build a jetpack sales room so people can cross the Thames by jetpack. That's great, and that's a perfectly fun method of exploration. But what I want to talk about here today is real world problems that come from sort of communities and the sort of different ways that people live together and the clashes and the problems that can sometimes cause, and how architecture can be a part of helping that. And of course, I think that would be completely pointless working for real people if the things you were drawing and producing weren't accessible to them, if you were only able to read something that you've drawn. If you had a degree in architecture, that wouldn't be very accessible, and it sort of smacks of a double standard. So I'd like to showcase some of the stuff from the BSc that I think is really clear and open, and try and take sort of the Bartlett show. It's been taken physically out of London, but try and take it out of the sort of London design bubble. I think it's a really great opportunity to do so, having it online this year, and share it with as many of you as possible. If you join me, won't you? I'm going to start with UG0 because it is the lowest number. UG0 is one of the older units. I think it's, I've got 2 units that have been around the Bartlett before and 3 that are new years. The unit 0 has been around for 1,000 years, maybe. It's been here forever. And this year they've been looking at multitudes, and kind of rediscovering the sort of neglected space in London with a real social focus of architecture as a social condenser and the multitudes that presents. And there's some really fantastic work. I would like to start with this work by Temi, which sort of addresses something really contemporary relevant this year, the kind of Black British history and how that's overlooked in a lot of our museums. A lot of our galleries are very whitewashed, and she's kind of hoping to redress that balance in SE15 in Peckham, which is an area known as London's Little Lagos, where she is thinking about the attic space, and sort of in a house, an attic space becomes a sort of personal archive. That was her first project for the year, about the sort of hoarding of things and memories and experiences that go on in people's attics, and how you could use that sort of interesting typology maybe to create in London's Little Lagos this community-led heritage centre to redress the balance of the sort of the way that Black British history is overlooked in a lot of our contemporary museums. And I just love these drawings. I think they're really fantastic, really clear. It's immediately clear sort of what we're talking about. The culture kind of comes through these drawings, and I think they are just fantastic. It's a really lovely project. And then next, I would like to go, if I zoom all the way down here, I'd like to look at Peter's work. Peter is working, his project is recasting Holloway Women's Prison, which is based in Holloway Women's Prison, which is a women's prison in Holloway. He's read the Baroness Coulston 2007 report, which was a report into kind of different ways of rehabilitating women and who've committed crimes, and the sort of shortcomings of our women's prison system. There's some really interesting facts in here that I had no idea about. Women spend an average of 3 months served in prison, and that means that their houses and their lives get destroyed and taken away from them, and then they only have 3 months, and then they're spat back out into the world with sort of nothing again. Such short sentences that quite often they don't even reach the sort of rehabilitative programs that are available to men in prison. And he's thinking about how you can take hold of the former women's prison site in Holloway, which was sold off by Mr. Bean lookalike runner-up George Osborne, and it's being turned into this sort of very conventional housing development. And he's thinking about keeping it as a site which could help to serve as part of the penal system in a different way to the way that the women's prison did. As you can see, he's sort of developed his ideas through model making. It's resulted in this really lovely, again, really clear, just obvious what it means model, where you've got this mixture of social housing and rehabilitative facilities for these women, so that they can come out of whatever situation it was that they were in that's driven them to crime. They can come out of that and be safe in this safe space. I think it's a really fantastic project that addresses an issue that's maybe not talked about so much. We don't talk about women's prisons so much in this country, and I think Peter's tackled it in a really, really clever way. Next up, I would like to, over to the left here, look at Andre Dinu's work, which is a social housing project down in Elephant and Castle. Not Elephant and Castle, really. It's down in Walworth, where the Haygate estate used to be. I've made fun of George Osborne. I'll make fun of Labour and the Lib Dems now. The Labour and the Liberal Democrat Council back in 2004 sent out a survey to the residents of the Haygate estate. Would they like, improvements to their kitchen? And obviously they said yes. They took that survey and they used it as an excuse to demolish this estate and destroy this community and scatter it across London. And what was 1,214 social houses has been replaced by 82 social houses and swathes of sort of Ministry of Sound adjacent private student halls, and very sort of exclusive, not community focused design that's tearing kind of Walworth away from Walworth and bringing it more towards sort of central London living. And what Andre's done is just designed a really nice combined social housing and student housing development. I think this plan is quite nice, quite lovely, quite clear, and yeah, just tackled, I think, a really important issue. I think the destruction of the Haygate estate was one of the greatest mistakes in London planning. I think it was done in the worst way that it could have possibly be done. And she's just working to redress that balance. I think it's a really great place to start a project. I will go all the way up to the other end now, to Unit 12. Unit 12 started the year designing with their eyes wide shut to Prague, going to Prague sort of without any knowledge, with just their preconceptions. And then the second half of the year, they turned that around on its head and designed sort of very socially aware, very contextually aware buildings for Prague, as much as they possibly could. So it took completely the opposite approach, and it's come out with some really interesting buildings. I want to start with Kirsty's work, because as well, there's a different kind of accessibility, I suppose, for potential prospective students, or maybe students coming from first year to second year at the Bartlett. I think the Bartlett can seem like a bit of a CAD and render farm. And this is just a really nice example of some hand-drawn work that I think is really superbly clear. She's designing an archive library for some samizdat literature, which was banned by the communist regime in Czechoslovakia, and now is held in this archive. But it's sort of, the archive doesn't struggle to get government funding and things. It's just in this other building. It's not really on show as perhaps it should be. And she's just designed this really nice looking centre to sort of showcase this part of the sort of Czechoslovakian history there in the modern day city of Prague. And I love these plans. It's a slightly different way of doing plans to quite often what we see at Bartlett. And I love the hand-drawn touch. I think it's fantastic. And again, a really interesting project. Takes quite a specific part of Prague's history and a very specific client as well, and works to sort of resolve something for them now. Oh, I love that zoom. It goes right the way across. To Neve's work, Sponge City, which tackles the Czech Republic, and specifically Prague has an aging population. And it's really smart. It seems so obvious, but it didn't occur to me until I sort of read into it. Of course, to tackle an aging population, you have to house the elderly, but you also need to encourage people to have more children. And she's provided that with a kindergarten in the same space as a home for elderly residents. And by providing that, of course, people are more likely to have children if there's a place for them to be cared for and looked after while they're at work. It just makes perfect sense. And I think these renders are really great. You can immediately tell, here's children, here's old people. It's the idea of that cohesion comes across perfectly, but it is this plan that I'm just in love with. This is super gorgeous, I think. I love the occupation in it. I think it doesn't look too busy. It looks sort of perfect, but every little detail is so perfectly clear, just from a plan as well. I think it's really fantastic. I would absolutely encourage you to come and look at this project in more detail in your own time. I think it's really fantastic. Moving along again to Unit 10. There's no 11, so we're straight to 10. Jackdaw Dream. Jackdaw Dream, I didn't know this. Jackdaw Dream is a H.G. Wells quote, which describes the home as a jackdaw's dream, i.e. just full of clutter and crap and the things we sort of collect along the way. And I think that's a really fantastic analogy. It's sort of something they've used to appropriate not making social housing, not making housing units, but making homes. What makes something a home instead of a house? And it's that social aspect, that community. So they've gone and they've worked with real people in South London. Again, this is Megan's project. This is in Sydenham, a place where you pronounce all of the consonants and none of the vowels. And they've actually created these projects with real people instead of just speaking to other architects. They've gone out of the bubble. And I think that's really fantastic. And throughout the units produce some really fantastic sort of results. You can actually, see the quotes that people have said about the building. I think it's fab. And as well, so hers is a wellbeing centre, tackling sort of the mental health problem in this country. We've got a huge funding and resource deficit for mental health here. And it's just, I think this is a great way of using models. Again, it feels like clarity and accessibility were really at the forefront of her mind, at the top of her agenda. Just in sort of comping these models into the context and putting these people in, it just becomes so much immediately so much clearer. What she's talking about. I think it's really fantastic. And again, lovely clear drawings, and it's really nice to see exactly throughout the unit sort of how real people's actual real opinions have sort of come to form the basis of these projects. I would also like to look at over here Jamie's work. Oh, this just makes me happy, this image here. It's exactly the sort of thing that I like to think I would do if I had the patience to line up photos like that. He's talking about how in sort of suburban hinterland London, all the houses were built with really generous front gardens, which have been paved over and turned into driveways since they were built in the 30s. And in doing so, the homes that were once homes have become a little bit more houses. They've lost that sense of community. People don't talk over the fence. People don't have a part of themselves on show for the community, for the people who are walking past. And he's sort of trying to redress that in, I don't know where this is in South London again. And just these, it's all shown with renders here at the show. I think they're very nice, very stylized, quite tactile feeling renders. But again, it's just eminently clear what he's talking about, especially in this. I think is a lovely, lovely image. We can just see exactly what they mean. People have front gardens and hence they spend time in them. And then you see your neighbours, and just about having that sense of community in the housing that you design. I really love these. They're just very, very, very nicely done. Very nicely done. That is it for Unit 10. I'd like to go next all the way down to Unit 6. Unit 6, 10 and 6 are both new units this year. I'm just going to let this play because I love it. Unit 6 is thinking about how we do building and what materials we use. Obviously, we are at the Bartlett, everyone signed the Architecture Students Declare. We're all sort of a lot more environmentally conscious than we were even this time last year, which sounds so ridiculous. It feels like we've come such a long way in a year with something we've known about for so long, but finally it feels like sort of something is being galvanized. So they've taken that that sort of environmental ethos and gone to work more collaboratively in a way that's not often done in Bartlett units, particularly at undergrad, working more collaboratively with, again, real housing groups, real designers in Buckinghamshire, in Aylesbury. They've sort of worked on a group master plan, I understand, for the Aylesbury Garden Town, which was a government initiative sort of bringing back in one of this new wave of news house that's sort of petered out a little bit now. But this is Maria's work, and she's just talking about creating a solution for a housing typology which is then able to be used again and again and again, as opposed to a specific context. It's a little bit more general, but tackles a very specific problem sort of worldwide in terms of the environmental impact of building and what we build and how to build environmentally, but as well how to build on a mass scale, how to build all these new houses that you would need in like a garden city development. You'd need a lot of houses again and again, but without it being that sort of monotonous Barratt, Keepmoat, Taylor Wimpey style thing where everything is the same and everyone lives in the same space. So she developed these sort of flexible spaces. I think these renders are really lovely. Obviously very, you know, you see a lot of the authorship come through. It's very stylized, but it's so clear and accessible. I don't think it's confusing in any way. I think it's so straightforward, but it's these plans that I am absolutely in love with. This is very nice, very clearly annotated, but then these zooms in, I think they're just fantastic. I think they, again, are really clear. You just get an idea of the occupation. It doesn't look too busy, but all the details are there. Everything you could need to know is there. And you get a nice sense of sort of the materials from a plan, which is so rare that you get to see such a great level of, get a great overview in the plan. I think these are really, really lovely. Also in 6, I always struggle to find this one. Somewhere down the back here, yes, Sarah's work. So Sarah was thinking about, this is something else the unit sort of tackled en masse, post-factory culture, and about bringing where things are made and what we make closer to home. You know, it's something we talked about a lot. Again, it's something we talked about a lot kind of 10 years ago, air miles and anchor butter being a very bad thing. That's from my childhood, I think, but like it's being brought up again here because it's so important. We ship things from across the world. What if we didn't? What if where you worked and where things were produced were next to the homes that you used them in? It makes complete sense. And it's sort of a different way, as opposed to tackling, I suppose, tackling the environmental crisis from an architect's perspective by building in a conscientious way. It's also, what can architects do in the planning, in the brief stage, to sort of help reduce our carbon footprint and be more environmentally conscious, be better at that sort of thing. And again, I think these plans are just lovely, lovely renders. But I think it's the kernel of the idea here is really fantastic, about bringing together sort of affordable housing for makers, people who would otherwise struggle to get into sort of the creative and the design professions, because let's face it, it's a tough racket for your first, 5 years in design. You might not make any money. You need somewhere to live that's affordable. And she provides that while also thinking about bridging the gap between where things are made and where the people who use them live. I think it's really fantastic. And now, saving the best to last, I would like to go to Scotland. My own unit, my Unit 1. We've been based in Glasgow this year, which is sort of where the inspiration for this tour comes from. Glasgow as a city has been prescribed architecture quite often. It was prescribed quite a lot of, quite radical by comparison, modernism, sort of big tower blocks and a huge inner city motorway and new towns en masse, sort of against the will of the people who actually had to live with them. Architects sort of imposed their will on them. And as well, governments. It was the city in the UK with the highest proportion of social housing of any city. And since Thatcher, that has absolutely nosedived. And now it's a shrinking city as well. Since the 80s, the ports and the docks that sort of had made Glasgow thrive have all disappeared. and the city is shrinking. So we were thinking about what is the role of an architect in a city which is shrinking, as opposed to a place which is expanding. Quite a lot of architecture focuses on sort of making anew, but what can architects do to help sort of social needs in a city where there's more land and less buildings and less people, and taking a global view of that as well, thinking about global issues like the environment and all the social problems that sort of affect us on a global scale and require a global solution. And what role can architects play in that? I'm starting with Asia's work here, which is based off of the SNP's promise of 30 hours of free childcare a week for every child aged 3 and 4 in Scotland. And that is a promise that has been slightly hampered by the social divisions in Scotland. So in a place like Morningside or Kelvinside, the very wealthy areas of Glasgow and Edinburgh, there's no problem with finding that 30 hours of free childcare. But in the places where people need it most, where there's most single parent families, where there's most families where 2 parents work and they need that childcare to go and earn a living, that childcare is harder to come by because there's fewer hours and the nurseries are overstretched. So ASIA has taken that very particular problem in the area of Govan in South Glasgow, which was a former dockyard area, and tried to address that quite simply by creating a nursery space to provide this childcare. And her renders are really lovely. I really do like them a lot. Very child focused. It makes, you know, perfect sense, but I think they're absolutely gorgeous. And again, super clear. Just all you need to see is children playing and you understand exactly what this project is about. Again, lovely plans. And this AXO is just my favourite thing. I think it's gorgeous and really appropriate and takes in so much of the sort of social context and things which would have previously in Glasgow design been ignored, and the will of the people in Glasgow would have been ignored. And Asia sort of worked with the local people's opinions to create a really wonderful scheme. Next up, also on the theme of childcare, look at this. Wow, zoom all the way over to Mabel and the feet. Mabel is also thinking about childcare in Bridgeton, which is in Glasgow's East End, the other side of the river from Govan, and the other side of the city as well. In Glasgow, here it is, 51% of households with dependent children are overcrowded. There's a massive amount of single parent families in this area of Glasgow. There's sort of a real need for a rethink of how childcare is provided, hence, you know, the SNP's promise, that's where that comes from. But as well, what role can architects play? The tenements, which Glasgow is sort of famous for, don't necessarily provide children with the outdoor space. Quite a lot of the courtyards which they used to have been turned into parking or turned into bin stores, and they are no longer a space for children to play safely. And in a city, or in a place in a city where, you know, there's lots of single parent families, children quite often outnumber in their households the adults. Why are we still designing housing with adults at the forefront and children are sort of an afterthought? And Mabel's flipped that on its head and thought about designing housing with children sort of at its centre, both thematically and literally, children at the centre in this courtyard being able to play. Again, I think it's really clear, everything, these drawings are accessible, and a really great social project, really great sort of bit of social engineering, I suppose, just to flip that on its head. It's quite a simple thought, but it's something that's not been done before, and she's used it to really great effect, I think, here. Yeah. Also in Bridgeton, in the East End, is some housing projects, which annoyingly is on the back of someone else's work in this fake travel sickness world we are in. Mitch's work, which is for Landressy Gardens, also in Bridgeton. Just thinking, I think this is just the most fantastic map of derelict land in teal here, with the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivations, 10% of most deprived areas in Scotland. And you can see the correlation. It's the places which have got derelict land left over from where they had formerly had really strong industries, and now the people who are left living there, there's no jobs there anymore. There's swathes and swathes of derelict land, and that has created this sort of immovable, almost, social division. The very densely packed places still have shops and they still have places to work, whereas the people are sort of left stuck in these areas with no jobs and no facilities anymore. And Mitch is sort of trying to redress that as well, trying to up the, trying to sort of turn back the clocks in terms of Glasgow's social housing, and make the proportion of social housing available in Glasgow more reflective of the social housing that's needed in Glasgow, because it's, as everywhere else in the country, there's far less housing than there are people who need social housing. So he's using Landrassy Gardens as a sort of blueprint for how this could work on other infill sites by using old, like proper good standards of size, proper nice spacious social houses in infill sites in Glasgow. And again, another hand-drawn project that I think is really lovely. This occupation, again, it's so clear, it's so straightforward, not complicated. I think it's really really well executed and well shown, and I love these drawings, and a really fantastic project, again tackling a really prescient issue in Glasgow. And then I would like to end with all the way back at the start here, another social housing project on the same set of streets in Bridgeton, Landrassy Gardens by Rory, which responds to exactly the same brief as Mitch, almost. It's about creating a sort of social cohesion. These people in Bridgeton used to, the sort of society, the community in Bridgeton came out of people going to work together. People work together in the same industries, and now the industries have gone. The community's sort of going with it, and there's a generational change happening. The people who were working in these factories in sort of the 60s, 70s are now dying, and there's new people coming in, but there's nothing to bring that community together. So Rory's thinking about social housing, which can be a way to foster a community, and how can, he's built in sort of different ways to customize your house, different sort of modules, things that can slit in and out, and how that means that the community, the people who live there, can sort of affect change and make this their own, and make and means that they meet people as well. They meet each other working on these projects together. I think this ISO is just the best drawing of it possible. It's absolutely fantastic. You can see, you know, these people from the houses coming down to work in sort of the equivalent of their own garden, all of them working together on different things and creating this sort of community community spirit by doing and by renovating their own properties. I think it's really a fantastic idea, but I think fantastically drawn as well, super clear. I think it's a really great section, but it's this ISO that I'm going to end on because I really like it. I think it's a fantastic example of architecture that works for the community, and then a drawing that is just so clear and so straightforward. It doesn't take any abstractions. It's clearly intended for the people who would actually live here, as opposed to a drawing that would be intended to sort of impress other architects and just be talked about endlessly in crits and in school. It feels like something that you could actually go and take to like a planning meeting and show to people, and they would understand what you meant, and they would sort of, that's the way to get people on board, by actually communicating with people. I think sort of what all of these projects are talking about maybe is a thought about not addressing ourselves to other architects so much, which I feel is something that maybe the Bartlett has a bit of a reputation for. But I just wanted to show projects today that were different from that, and that maybe changing, that maybe that reputation is changing slightly, and that you can succeed on the BSc and produce fantastic work like this, which is clearly very beautiful as well, but doesn't need to take sort of an architect's perspective, but can take a community perspective, both in its brief and then in its presentation as well. I'm in the chat now in YouTube. Stick any questions you've got for me in the chat, and then please go and have a look at all these projects. I'll put the links in the description for some of them, and go browse the show website. And when we're open again, I'm sure we'd love to all have you back at the Bartlett someday soon. But thank you so much for listening to me whittle on for however long it's been. It's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed doing this. So thank you. Cheers, guys. Bye.